Is this why you can't retire? That's what I'm going to cover in this video. There's this concept I want to cover that could be the reason, more than likely is the reason, that you may never retire. Not just now, but ever. So let's fix that. The idea is we all live on this thing called the hedonic treadmill. The basic idea is once you've experienced something, a certain level of comfort or a certain perk, it's very hard to step back from that without feeling like a failure, without feeling like you're missing out. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of that. And I'm going to talk about how this can really contribute to you not being able to retire and how understanding this concept is why I retired. I made it to 40 almost without ever having $1,000 in the bank. Single parent with 3 kids, found out about $89,000 in bad debt in my name that I didn't know existed until the divorce, and was able to retire after getting laid off from law enforcement because of the 2008 recession and starting teaching at a CDL school making $17 an hour. I was able to retire in 12 years, about a decade. Could have retired in 8, worked for 4 more years because I ended up really liking the job of teaching at the CDL school. And I had been demoted all the way down to president of the company. But at the 12-year point, because I understood this concept of the hedonic treadmill, it actually made it not easy, but a lot easier than it could have been to retire early. That's what I'm trying to help you do. Help the average individual understand that you can reach financial freedom and make work completely optional in 10 years or less, even if you're not starting from the best position. You don't have to retire early, but life is a lot better when you have options. The first thing I want to talk about with the hedonic treadmill is how I got started in investing. If you live with your parents and you have to live under their roof, live by their rules, attend high school. I moved out at 15. Wasn't my goal to stay in my parents' house. What's the quick timeline on that? Dad left when I was 8. Spent 8 to 12 with my mom. Dad came back. Spent 12 to 14 at my dad's. 14 started working on moving out. 15 moved out. I moved into an apartment and had roommates. Imagine if you move out of your parents' house and you have roommates, and then something went wrong and you had to move back in with your parents. Do you understand how the hedonic treadmill says that's a failure? You moved out even though you had roommates. If you ever have to move back, that's a failure. So if you move out and you have roommates, and let's say you get a job, stabilize yourself, start renting your own place. There are a lot of people who start to rent their own place when they used to have roommates, but now that they're paying the entire place on their own, refuse to even consider ever having roommates again because they've reached that level of comfort of having their own space with no one else having access to the entire place. Well, what if you buy a house? When I got laid off from law enforcement, I owned a house, right? Through a few, we're not going to count them, divorces, I've been able to keep custody of kids and keep the house. I've never been able to keep a girl around. So I'm not sure what's the better route there. But I owned a house. I had a bad debt to income ratio because of the $89,000 in bad debt, low income, right? It was really hard to buy anything. I moved from my house into an apartment. Would you do that? If you owned a house, had a mortgage, saved the, took care of the down payment, qualified for the loan, whatever it took, kept it through the divorce, had that house, could you step back from that hedonic treadmill and say, I have reached the level of comfort of owning my own home, but I'm going to live in an apartment for 2 years, and actually lived in a couple of apartments for those 2 years, so that I could rent my house out and get rental income on my tax returns. If you are renting, are you willing to step back to when you had roommates? If you are in a place with roommates, are you willing to move back in with your parents if that might possibly be the best route for you to have the ability to save money, to reduce your cost of living expenses? So we look at housing. Then from the apartment, I didn't purchase another house because they didn't cash flow. I purchased a duplex and moved into one side, rented out the other. It was kind of like living in the apartments because I still had my 3 kids, but now I got to pick the apartment. The person who was going to be in the apartment next to us, screen them, kick them out if it didn't work out. Separate units, totally fenced yards, our own living space, no roommates. There's a lot of people I hear that have families with kids and they say, I can't house act because I have kids. So somehow you're different than the literal millions of people who live in apartment buildings. That's no different than living in a duplex or triplex or fourplex or a house with an ADU, not even touching each other and being able to screen the people in an apartment next door. But we're stuck on that hedonic treadmill. We have done the work to acquire our house, or we have reached a point where we could buy a house. There's no way we would buy a house where we had neighbors living in the unit touching us, like Josh and Mary, the REI stoners, right? They have been living on their own for years. They didn't went out, they moved to another state, they saved, they learned the market, they bought a duplex to move into one side instead of buying a single family house. So they're not even taking a step back from the house, but they're moving from whatever they were renting into their own place and didn't have to buy a house, because it's not always about progressing for the immediate gain. Now, Josh and Mary live in one side of a duplex, have secured a tenant for the other side, and I'm super, I want to say proud, but it's not like they're my kids. I'm super proud of what they did by not just taking the first tenant that came along, lowering their standards to that point. They actually held out till they found decent tenants that met their criteria. Very smart move. That's housing. That's just one aspect. House hacking for me mattered because I wasn't making a lot and I had a lot of debt that I didn't know about until the divorce. Maybe you make more. Maybe you've made better choices with finances and relationships, and you don't have that debt problem. So maybe house hacking isn't the most important thing. Because if you make enough and you can save down payments, buying investment properties isn't that much different than house hacking. House hacking does get us the lower down payment option, which means more leverage, which isn't always the best thing, but it does mean a better interest rate. But if you can buy the investment properties, you currently work and you get off work and then you can go home and relax. If you buy a rental now, you might have to answer a phone call from your property manager or the tenant. You might have to interact with a handyman like I did this morning, saying, here's the tasks I want you to go out and do, or find a new handyman like I had to this morning. You have that hedonic treadmill of when I'm off work, I can now relax. I can Netflix by myself. Is that still chilling? But are you willing to take a step further on that hedonic treadmill and say, when I get off of work, if I only work my 9 to 5 for someone else and I never work my 5 to 9 for me, I will be working until the day that I die. Once you realize that you have those evenings and weekends to start putting things together to develop cash flowing assets for yourself, retiring becomes possible. Retiring early for me was the goal and happened in about a decade. That's the goal to share with you. So let's move on from housing, because maybe you house hack, maybe you make enough and don't have the debt, don't need to house hack, but you can have the rentals. To look at your car. What was your first car? Mine technically would be a farm vehicle, right? Wasn't old enough to have a license or even a permit. I had a Subaru station wagon, cut the top off because that was cooler, because I'm stupid. Throttle cable was broken. So I had a throttle cable that went from the window to the hood, and I could adjust the gas pedal with that. First car wasn't even one that was street legal. So you get a street legal car that actually has brakes, is registered, and has insurance. And it's 10 or 15 years old because that was what you could afford. Eventually, you can afford a newer car, one with amazing features like airbags or remote start or moonroof, sunroof, whatever new thing, Bluetooth connection for your stereo. If your car's old enough, they don't even have those if you go far enough. And you get the newer car and you have payments. I have friends who had car payments, but as soon as their car was going to be paid off, they had to, like I could physically see the need in their face. They had to go get a new car with a new payment, because having a car that was paid off where you don't have payments means that it might break down and you can't fix it. That's not how that works. There are people who have car payments where they're making payments beyond the warranty. So now they have payments and the car can break down and you can't afford to fix it. So having those reserves to be able to fix your car, or the way I did it, I had at least 3 cars that were all over. I think the newest one I had was about 15 years old at the time. One of them had to run well enough to get me to work. If you've been the type of person who purchased a house and purchased a car and has had all the nice new features like remote start and probably surviving a crash because you have airbags, are you willing to give up remote start, Bluetooth, and the last 10 years of technology to buy a 10 or 15-year-old car, maybe pay cash $5,000 to $10,000 instead of a $25,000 to $40,000 vehicle where you have payments and full coverage insurance. I was going to say premium, but full coverage insurance to cover that vehicle. You're adding somewhere between $300 to $800 a month to your expenses to have that car, versus you could save the money, buy an older car, keep reserves to fix it when it breaks, because new cars can break too. Are you willing to be seen? Do you know how much crap I took being the president of a company and living in a duplex? I had staff members. I made a video not too long ago where they bought an RV and Sea-Doos in a $700 something thousand house. And they kind of laughed at me and they said, Dion, you have the money to buy $1 million house. Why don't you? And I said, the reason I could go buy $1 million house is because I haven't. I house hacked and I acquired rentals so that I don't have to work. Those people have guaranteed they're going to work for the next 30 years. Guaranteed. Like they put it in stone. They're continuing to make choices that make it impossible to retire or retire early because they're on that treadmill. And not only the treadmill of we have experienced this level of comfort or this perk, and we don't want to step back, but to the point that every 6 months to a year, they look at their life and they think, what can we do to increase our level of comfort? What can we do to increase the way people think we are with our money? Not my recommendation. So we look at those cars. Let's take it past that. So you got your housing, you got your transportation. Now let's look at vacations. The first 8 years of my investing, I never took a vacation. I took a couple 3-day weekends and maybe went camping. We lived on a lake. We spent a lot of time on the lake there. But I never Disneyland, Disney World, travel to another country, take a week off and go to the Keys or anything like that for 8 years. So that at the 12-year point when I retired, it's a vacation forever. I never need to know what day it is. I usually know what Tuesdays are because Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, I do live streams like this, and I actually answer all questions that come into the comments. So if you want your questions answered during a live Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, right here on YouTube, I might stream on Facebook someday. Maybe. We'll see. But not today. Are you willing to take shorter vacations or delay how long? For me, so here's the thing that's kind of making this easy. I delayed taking vacations for those 8 years. Started investing at 40. First 2 years was just saving before buying that duplex. But 8 years with no vacations, that's kind of easy because I wasn't taking them. Here's the hardest part with the hedonic treadmill. If you have a newer car, really hard to get rid of that car payment, full coverage insurance, and step back to a 10 to 15-year-old car. If you've been taking a vacation every year that costs you $5,000 to $10,000, and you plan it out with the Disneyland app so that you make sure you stuff in as much as possible, or you take a cruise like I did earlier this year to the Mediterranean, and you make sure that you go to all the places you want to. I got to see Olympics where they were founded, the stairs at Santorini, have actual Italian food in Italia, which is not how you say that. My friends in Canada tell me that I say that wrong too. All of those things could do forever, could do over and over and over, because I didn't do them for 8 years. So that I could take the money that would have gone to those vacations and put it into cash flowing assets. For me, it was easy because I wasn't taking the vacations. But if you've been taking them, how do you feel if you look at 2024 and you say, in 2023, we took 2 full 1-week vacations, spent $5,000 to $10,000 on each one, but in 2024, we're not going to. Do you feel like the person who had to move back in with your parents? That level of failure of stepping back, instead of let's adjust the thought to, if I delay the gratification from taking a vacation for the next 4+ years, I did 8 because I was in a really bad position. Hopefully yours is better. Maybe you don't have to do it as long, to where you can make every day Saturday instead of 1 week twice a year. Vacations are the hard one if you've been taking them, especially if you have a family and your family is expecting those things. Let's look at what happened in the last 5 years with cable, right? There was a period of time, and I will always apologize to my kids for this, for a long time, where we didn't have cable at the house. We had the each season of Friends on DVD, right before Blu-ray, but it was like literally DVDs. So my poor kids grew up watching Friends on rerun because it was what we actually had at the house, but we didn't have cable. If you have cable now and you're paying somewhere between $100 and $300 a month, there are people who I had cable for a while after I reached financial freedom. I had cable, right? So whatever streaming service you want. But now most of us have cut the cord and we don't have cable. Instead, we have Hulu, premium, so no commercials, Netflix, HBO, Prime, Peacock. There are people out there that watch sports ball, and they probably have a few channels for that too. Not my thing. But if you aggregate all those together, you're talking $100 to $300 for all of your streaming services. As a financially free person who never has to work again in my life, I can be okay with those. For the years when I didn't have it, it was easy for me to continue to not have it. However, like the person who's been taking vacations or the person who's had a nice new car, can you step back and say, I know Hulu has this one show. I'm going to watch The Rookie. It's only on Hulu. Have to watch it. And I know Netflix, they're the only one that's coming out with the new Witcher seasons. Got to have it. And whatever show was on each streaming, they're really good, right? They're very picky. They all have, it's like sports draft. They have enough to get a few of the players that they want. They can't buy the entire team, which is, it's ironic that the team that usually wins the Super Bowl has the most money to spend on who they can put on their team. But you're picking and choosing your streaming services based on one or two shows on each one. Can you step back from the hedonic treadmill and say, yeah, I'm not going to watch that show for a few years, let a few seasons build up, and then I'll probably get the service, binge it for a month or two, and then cut the service. Can you do that? To take that $100 to $300 a month and put it into an account? Because it doesn't sound like a lot. We'll cut it in half. $200 a month, $2,400 a year, 3 or 4 years. That's your reserves or your down payment for the next owner-occupied property. That can have a huge impact on your life. I waited this long in the video to make sure that I didn't cuss early on. I'm going to use the F word, the kid-friendly F word. At the end of the video, I'm going to use the non-kid-friendly F word. If you want retirement, if you want to early retire, and you're not willing to do everything that I mentioned in this video, not everything, 80-20 rule. If you're not willing to do 80% of these things, maybe not house hack, but can you adjust the type of car you have? Can you delay the vacations? Can you turn eating out 4 or 7 times a week into 1 or 2 for a period of time? I've actually taken an oath that I will never cook again. I always eat out. Now I have what's called a reverse budget. My goal is to actually spend at least $2,000 a month eating out. That's my goal. This is something you can do in retirement if you delay it for now. But if you can't do those things, most of those things, and you want to retire or retire early, too freaking bad. It's not going to happen. You're going to end up like half of the people that make over $150,000 a year in the US that live paycheck to paycheck. You're going to end up like 48% of the people between the age of 55 and 60 in the United States who have zero saved for retirement. You have to pick your portion of the treadmill that you can step back on. I hope this video at least made you think. And you can be angry with me if you want. But if you're not willing to do some of these sacrifices, you can't expect the rewards. There's no participation trophy in retirement. Thank you for hanging out with me during a live stream. I will look at the chat, and if there's any questions there that I can get answered on a Tuesday, I will see you Tuesday for my next live stream where I talk about, well, you might watch this in Futureland, so it won't matter. This is Tuesday's video. I have notes. My memory is awesome. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk and for that F word that I wanted to share. My daughter was 6 or 7 and wasn't supposed to cuss, of course, you know, young kid. But she had heard somebody say, shut the front door. And logically, she knew what word was being replaced. So I had some friends over for a barbecue. Instead of taking a vacation, have friends come over. So my 6 or 7 year old daughter, in front of a bunch of people, looks at a bunch of other kids and goes, "Shut the fucking front door." I think she nailed it.